Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome back to Evening Dhamma. First of all, my broadcast schedule has changed, and I didn't announce the change in advance, so kind of apologies for that. But it's good to shake things up once in a while. And apologies though, because I'm sure people were making time to come and listen, but also our meditators, we had meditators leave and cancel and so on, so there were no meditators for a day, I think, so I didn't have an audience, so it seemed like a good time to switch. So my schedule now is going to be Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday for giving talks. It's not that I have a problem giving a talk every day, not really, but I think it's a lot. It's a lot for people to process, and I have the feeling that it's better to give less and let people digest it. That's the idea. Seems like I'm just accumulating talks on YouTube that, probably not a lot of people are going to end up watching. It's just too much. So we do a little bit less and people will have more time to digest. That's the idea. Well, that end, I'm going to have to, I'm going back to university to take a few language courses. So Wednesday or Tuesday I won't be available in the evening anyway, so it's a good reason to change my schedule. Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, for now. Friday night, of course, we have our study group, and we'll be switching to the Abhidhamma. We'll be studying Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation and commentary on the Abhidhammata Sangaha, which hopefully will be interesting and enlightening for people. So tonight we're looking at what I think will be the final section of the Satipatthana Sutta. I guess we'll have a little more to say after this, but we're not going to get into the Four Noble Truths. The last two sections are the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Or no, the last section is the Four Noble Truths, which includes the Eightfold Noble Path, but we've already just recently gone over them. So I'll talk a little bit about how they fit into the Satipatthana Sutta, and then the conclusion of the sutta. We'll do it together on Monday, hopefully. But tonight we have the Bojjhanga. And so by this time you should hopefully see a little bit of a progression in the Dhamma category. So in regards to Dhammas, we're seeing how this is really a description of the path of progression. So we start with the hindrances, which are really at the bottom. They're the first thing that has to go, first thing you have to deal with. And when the hindrances are still there, your practice is still floundering. So once you get rid of them, then you can start to, not get rid of them, once you weaken them anyway, you can start to look at the senses and the aggregates. And then, so the Bojjhangas fit in it for an advanced practice. These are what one should start to experience as a result of the practice. So for people who are looking for results, looking for a sign that the practice is working, well, this is a sign that the practice is working. If these are increasing, your practice is improving, and once these are perfect, that's the path. That's what leads one to. That's what leads the path to arise. So once these 7 factors are fully mature, then there will be not the arising, but one will I guess the arising of the path. One will enter into Nibbana. So the Bojjhangas, Anga means member. Anguli is a finger, so it's one of the members of your hand. Anga just means a member of something. A member of a community, or a member of a group of things. A member of a set. Bojjha comes from the root bujja, which is in regards to awakening. Bujjati means one awakens. It can be spiritual or not spiritual. When we talk about a person who's asleep, and in the morning then they wake up, bujjati, he or she wakes. Buj turns to bod, buj turns to boj, and bojjha. It also turns to Buddha. So I'm not sure how the grammar works that it turns to Bodja, but anyway, it comes from Bodhi, from this idea of enlightenment or awakening. Bodja means enlightenment. Right, so Bodja is a different construction because it's the state of enlightenment. Buddha is with the past participle ta, which anyway, you don't need to worry about the grammar. But in regards to enlightenment, Bojjhanga, the factors of enlightenment. So we're really talking about those things, those qualities that are essential for enlightenment. And it's important to note that obsessing over results is problematic, and it's a sure way to get in your own way of realizing these factors. And second, that you don't really cause them to arise at all. I mean, a big problem people have with results is how do you make them arise, right? How do you want wisdom, how do you turn it on? You want calm and peace. Where's the switch? Where's the dial to turn it up? What do I do, right? How do I create these things? And you don't, is the answer. They're a sign that your practice is going well. They're a sign that your practice is progressing. But they'll only come if you're being mindful, if you're actually practicing mindfulness meditation. Just like vipassana insight, you don't actually practice vipassana. It's what comes from the practice. So the qualities, another way of looking at these are the qualities which are required to give rise to vipassana, or give rise to wisdom. The first one is, of course, sati, or what we translate as mindfulness. And so there shouldn't be much need to explain this one, but we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of sati and how this set really highlights it. But it's the first, so obviously the first, it's what sort of the key that you turn that leads to the rest of them. And there is some work you can do in regards to these. Of course, first with mindfulness, it's the one that we can work to cultivate. Number 2 is Dhamma Vicaya. Dhamma Vicaya is probably the most difficult to understand. What is it actually referring to? Because it's unique. It's not something that you read about elsewhere very much. And sorry, just get back to the commentary here. And it's not one that's explained not very well. But here's what the commentary says that I think gives a good explanation of what it is. It's So there are good things and there are bad things, karmically good, karmically bad, right and wrong counterparts of bright and dark things, and an abundance of right reflection on them is the reason conducive to the arising of the non-arisen enlightenment factor of the investigation of mental objects. Investigation of Dhamma, not mental objects. Again, using this problematic translation. So the investigation of Dhammas means the observation and the sort of the results of being mindful. And once you're mindful, you start to see right from wrong. Basically, is all it's saying. So enlightenment comes from this discerning, this observing, and judging, really, sort of a natural judgment. And we talk about being non-judgmental, but really mindfulness is a lot about being judgmental. It's just not based on likes or dislikes. It's based on observation and wisdom, based on seeing things as they are. Hey, this leads to my detriment. Hey, this leads to my benefit. Or in other words, this, though I want to be happy, this leads me to be unhappy. Though I don't want to suffer, this leads me to suffer. So, to get really philosophical, they're contradictory. They are internally contradictory. They conflict with themselves. So we do this thinking it will make us happy, it doesn't make us happy. Well, that makes it wrong, I think, intrinsically, because it's not doing what it's expected to do. And so as you naturally see this, through being mindful, this is what gives rise to wisdom. So this investigative state, this state of clarity and discernment that arises from being mindful. And again, this is not something that you have to evoke. It's something that you should see arising. As you're practicing the 4 Satipatthana, your mindfulness, you should see mindfulness arising. And you should start to see this discernment arising, or this investigating. So you'll start to see wisdom arise, because you're investigating. You're looking at things, you're understanding them. And so if these aren't arising, well, then you've got a problem, and you have to ask yourself, why aren't they arising? What am I doing that is preventing them from arising? And it's usually to do with the 5 hindrances. If you have especially doubt, or if you have desire or aversion, if you're lazy, if you're distracted, if you're not actually focused on the experience, then no, these things won't arise. But if you're focused, you start to observe how certain states are productive and certain states are obstructive or problematic. Dhammavicaya is this state of mind that is able to see what is good and what is bad. Next, virya. So as you cultivate mindfulness and you start to see things as they are, through successful practice there will arise an increasing amount of energy. In the beginning you're struggling, but you'll start to see you get energetic. As you practice, you start to be impressed by how you have an increase in energy. You're able to walk and sit for longer periods of meditation. Your mind is better able to leap out to the object and be aware of the object rather than just reciting mantras and letting your mind wander. You have the energy, your mind is leaping out, is rising to the challenge. As you practice, this should increase. You should see that this is increasing through the practice. Number 4 we have is piti. Piti is is, again, one of these things I'm not quite sure how it's so mistranslated, but it's often translated as joy or bliss. And I don't really get that, because it's definitely, it's not Vedana. And the way it's described by the commentaries, it's not really an emotion. Not in that sense. Piti is, it's a state of rapture, really. I mean, as I understand, the Christians use the word rapture to mean something fairly specific, but when you're enraptured by something, it's this interest, or it's not exactly, because that's chanda, but it's this excitement, or it's like when you get in a groove, it's the quality of a habit. Piti is when you get caught up by something. So for a meditator, we often describe, like when a meditator is rocking back and forth, that's piti. And that can get in the way of your practice. That's a sort of piti that can be not problematic in and of itself, but because you're caught up in it, right? Or you get attached to it. But piti is anything, the state of getting in a groove, so you get caught up. And in a good way, as a factor of enlightenment, it means getting in the groove of mindfulness. You'll find it becomes smooth. Mindfulness becomes easier. As you practice, in the beginning, of course, it's a struggle again, struggle to be mindful. Piti is this getting in your groove, getting in the groove, getting caught up in the practice. So it starts to come naturally. You're able to be mindful in ways that you never thought possible. You become skilled, so it becomes habitual. And that's what piti refers to, as far as I understand. Of course, it seems there are other understandings. Number 5 is passaddhi. Passaddhi refers to tranquility. And this is one that meditators expect most, I think, in the beginning. You begin to practice, and the meditator will be looking for it, be waiting for it to come, and eventually wondering why it hasn't come yet. But if they stick with it, eventually actually being reassured by the fact that it does arise. There will arise tranquility of mind, and become less distracted, more focused, and less diverse in one's experiences. So there's less diffusion, meaning fewer thoughts about the past and the future and random things, as the mind becomes organized and calms down. You should see this through the practice. And again, this is, with all of these, they're necessary. Without some of these, without any of these, it's very difficult to see clearly. It's not really possible to see clearly. You need all of these. Your mind needs to be tranquil in order to truly see clearly. So that's what we're aiming for. Again, if your mind is not tranquil, you have to look at those things that are distracting you, and by being mindful of them, you naturally let them work themselves out. It's a natural process. Passaddhi isn't something that you can force. But when you're tranquil, when you become calm, well, then number 6 arises, which is concentration, samadhi. As you become, once you're calmed down, your mind is again able to focus. It's able to see things clearly. So when you see things, in the beginning, your mindfulness is weak. So you note something, but you're easily distracted, or it's not a firm mindfulness. Concentration is very firm. Concentration is what keeps you and strengthens your awareness on the object. So to the exclusion of everything else, when you're able to focus on one thing, even just for a moment, but there's a strength there. There's a clarity. There's a completeness where nothing else is distracting you. In the Abhidhamma, it would be just a strong state of mind. There are weak states of awareness and strong states of awareness in the Abhidhamma. not be a strong one with concentration. And the ability to, well, not the ability, but the state of being focused on the object. So again, with fewer distractions, your mind it gets in a rhythm. Samadhi is that factor that keeps you with the object of your attention. You're not caught off guard by anything. And number 7 is upekkha. Upekkha is really the defining factor. And again, it's important to differentiate between, upekkha means equanimity. So we're differentiating between a forced state of equanimity, where you repress your repress your judgments, your partialities, and the natural state of equanimity that comes from seeing things clearly. When you get to that point where you're able to see all experiences, everything that you see and hear and smell and taste and feel and think, when it no longer triggers a reaction through vipassana insight, which allows you to, or reminds you, or brings you to see that all experiences arise and cease, then there's an equanimity that arises along with that. Because it's hard to understand it, because this is new terminology and new ideas, but this is really the way it goes. Once you understand that everything arises and ceases momentarily, any attachment or desire or aversion you might have had towards those objects disappears. It doesn't have a foothold, because they're just not worth it. They arise and they cease moment after moment. Any one that you hold on to, what would be the point? What would be the benefit? It would just cause stress and suffering, because the thing would be gone the next moment. You start to see how little our emotions have to do with actual experiences. We're left in the lurch, reacting to something that's long gone. When you get to that point, that's really the pinnacle of insight. That's when the bojjhangas have really come together. Not through forcing equanimity, but through insight. And when you start to see that you're more equanimous, it's a sign that you're progressing. When you get to the point that you're totally equanimous, that you just see things as they are, it is kind of a suppression, because if you stop practicing, it'll all come back. But during that time, you really are ready to see things as they are. And when you reach that pinnacle, and you do see things as they are, that's when the real change comes about. I mean, the experience of nibbana is evoked. And with that, then there's a true change. There's no need to suppress the defilements. And they'll be gone. I mean, not completely, piece by piece, through seeing nibbana again and again, to realizing cessation of suffering. There will be a gradual cutting off of defilements permanently, for good. So that's the 7 bojjhangas. The only other thing to talk about is how they are balanced, and how the Buddha does talk about cultivating them. But again, I caution in regards to the idea of cultivating. I think it's important to note which ones are lacking, and or in what aspects is your meditation practice lacking or weak. So the Buddha differentiates between one who's energetic and one who is focused. So if you're too focused, or if you don't have enough energy, you'll get tired, and you'll be lazy, and your mind will be unwieldy. And at that time, at the time when you're drowsy or tired or lazy and so on, then you should cultivate, he says, the first after mindfulness, the first three after mindfulness. So putting mindfulness aside, we have six, which the first three are again Dhammavicaya, investigation of Dhammas, energy, and rapture. So these states have to be increased if you're lazy, and so the idea of actually cultivating them, I mean, I think it has much more to do with using mindfulness to balance. But that being said, no, there is room, practically speaking. If you want to spend some time reflecting, step back, then Dhammavicaya, you could understand in some way how you reflect on right and wrong. But again, caution in this regard, because it's no longer really meditation. In terms of the meditation, besides just cultivating mindfulness, I think it's a little bit more about being aware of of the imbalance. And virya, being aware that you have a lack of virya. And so being mindful of that. If you're tired, saying to yourself, tired. And I think just knowing that you're out of balance, that you're, okay, I'm drowsy or lazy, and saying to yourself, okay, I need more Dhammavicaya, more virya, I need more investigation of Dhammas, more effort, and more rapture, for lack of a better word. That sort of awareness, acknowledgement, is going to adjust your practice for you, if you keep that in mind. And again, with all the learning about the Dhammas, it's about keeping these things in mind and keeping us on track, rather than actively seeking them out. So when you realize, okay, yes, I need more of these things, and your mind naturally inclines, and you'll be more alert and aware of the imbalances. And so on the other side, if you're distracted, you know that you have to cultivate the last three, which are tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. So you can see how you're lacking in these because your mind is distracted. So you're just reflecting on them, and or reflecting on this fact, and reminding yourself, okay, I need because I don't have these, it's a sign that I'm not really being mindful, is really what it's all about. There's not much more you need to do than be mindful, but knowing about these things, studying the Dhamma, and keeping it in mind is helpful for allowing you to get a sense of what it means to be truly mindful. All of these things are indicators of what we really mean by being mindful, I think. So as long as we're practicing mindfulness, all 7 of these should become balanced naturally. You shouldn't have to artificially cultivate them. But it's good to know, and it's good to be aware of imbalances. The Buddha said, mindfulness is what is always useful. The other 6, 2 sets of 3, you have to balance them. Sometimes they can be out of whack if one is too much, but with mindfulness it can never be too much. So there you go, there's the 7 bojjhangas, really the 7 final qualities that we need to cultivate. When we get them, then we're at the peak, and we're ready to become enlightened. We'll look and see. I think there are a whole bunch of questions waiting. 13 questions. This is going to be a thing now. If I do fewer talks, I'll have a lot more questions each time. It's okay. Questions are good. I hear in teachings things like the brain doesn't exist, right? That physical objects don't exist. There's only our seeing. Our experience through the senses is the only reality. Nothing else actually exists. I mean, you're quoting the word. You're putting quotes around the word exist, and I think with good reason, because what does it mean to say something exists? So we're using a specific definition of exists here, meaning that which is experienced. So it's important and it's an important distinction. It's an important definition, because if you don't experience it, psychologically, it has a different quality than if you do experience it. And effectively, it has a different, practically speaking, it has a different quality to it. So if we talk about the brain, our experience of the brain, or the brain's work, is all abstract. It's useful and, practically speaking, good to talk, in a worldly sense. Talking about the brain is important, but psychologically and experientially, it's still just a concept. It's not something we experience. Whereas seeing, this is what Descartes got on about. He said, when you experience is something that you can't deny. So when I see something, yes, what I see is up in the air. I mean, up for debate. I don't know if I'm really seeing what I'm seeing. If you look at the brain, I don't know if it's really a brain or if it's a vision, a mirage, an illusion. I can't be sure of that. And the fact that I can't be sure of it is a sign that it's not. It's not. It's a different kind of real. But seeing, the experience of seeing is real. And effectively, the difference is that from our point of view, something like a brain is an entity. It's stable, it's lasting, it's controllable even. But seeing is not controllable. Seeing is not lasting. You see, this is really the important difference we're trying to make. The experiences are impermanent, unsatisfying, uncontrollable, and they're always going to be that way. You can't change or control experience. Concepts we can work with. You can change the brain. You can control entities. Think you can. And then you suffer when you can't, because of the underlying realities of experience being impermanent, unsatisfying, uncontrollable. Two different levels of reality. And it's not just philosophical, it's practical, it's very important. It's not important to understand these intellectually, but it helps when you understand them intellectually, so you don't have so much doubt about what is real and about why we're practicing and about the three characteristics and so on. Because, when you practice, there's no question that you're not experiencing things like a brain or a person. You're only experiencing seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, thinking, and they're a completely different quality. They arise and they cease, and they underpin everything. They are the building blocks of everything. You can't have a brain without experience. The concept that something exists outside of experience is just that. Even if you have experiments that can show, okay, the brain was there before, I look, it's still there, I stop looking, oh, it's still there, right? You can say, well, that means it exists independent of my seeing, because it's still there, and you see things, you plant a tree in the forest, you come back later, it's fallen over, And you say, well, that tree was there and it grew up and it fell over. Even though I wasn't there to hear it fall, it did fall, independent. All of that is going on in your mind. And you might argue with me and say, but, the evidence is overwhelming. It's a different kind of evidence. It's not real. I could make up an argument. Well, that's just your mind creating this reality. I don't know if that's the case, and it's not really important if it is. Your mind, because it expected the tree to fall, when it went back, it was still there. But maybe that's the case. I'm suspicious that it might, in some way, be the case. But it's not really important whether it is or not. The tree falling in the forest is all happening in your mind. All that's real is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, thinking. And that's an important way of looking at things, because it does allow you to let go of, it lets you interact and understand reality to the extent that you can eventually let go and be free from suffering. You can't do that with concepts, because they're subject to the realities of, again, these building blocks. Mahasi Sayadaw said in regards to noting breath, never verbally repeat the words rising, falling, and do not think of rising and falling as words. I don't know that he ever said that. I think the Mahasi Sayadaw never said such a thing. Never verbally repeat. Oh, so verbally out loud, right? Do not think of rising and falling as words. Yeah, he said something like that. That is true. But it was quite clear. You're supposed to actually say to yourself, not out loud, but in your mind, thinking. The point is not to see them as words in your brain, for sure, in your mind, for sure. You should actually speak the mantra in your head as if you're talking to yourselves. Absolutely. I don't think there's any other way of understanding Mahasi Sayadaw's teachings. People have tried, and I've talked about this, they've tried to, they've tried to talk about eventually, there's a big contention about eventually letting go of the mantra. But it's clear that that's how it starts. I'm just not convinced that you should ever let it go. But everyone agrees that in the beginning, that's how we start. I don't know how else you could understand it. When Mahasi Sayadaw says a meditator notes to themselves seeing, what is he talking about? Right? If it's not a mantra, what is it? Do you have any advice on dealing with delusion? It's a pattern of behavior in my thinking since my... Delusion is darkness. If you can't deal with delusion, you just have to be mindful. And when you're mindful, there's no delusion. It's not like greed and anger that you can note it. Delusion, you can note things like worry, that's a kind of delusion, or doubt, that's a kind of delusion. But the ignorance and most unwholesome states are, they're there because there's no mindfulness. So once you're mindful, the delusion will be gone. What's advice for delusion? Advice for delusion is to be more mindful. Okay, I'm not getting through these very quickly, but daily life, should we break down our movements to detailed small movements? Sure, yes, great. Don't be too hard on yourself, but if you can, do what you can. Try and be, have some sort of moderation there. Don't stress too hard about every minute detail of your life. Try and be moderate, noting the big stuff, or the sort of the stuff medium stuff, not too detailed, not too coarse. A borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by unstable sense of self, feelings of chronic emptiness. Can suffering actually be the result of good karma if it brings... So this DBT caused intense suffering, but it brought me to the path. Can suffering actually be the result of good karma if it brings you to the path, leading to its cessation? Well, the suffering wouldn't be there because of... I don't know DBT and I can't comment, but suffering can come from mindfulness practice, so that's a good question. But it's not coming from the practice of mindfulness. Suffering won't come from being mindful. But when you're mindful, the attachments that you have make you suffer because you're not reacting to them. You're not giving in to them. You're not getting what you want, and so that triggers. You're in a sense evoking suffering. You're instigating suffering. So mindfulness is kind of like a catalyst for the arising of suffering. But it's not bad karma. I mean, it is bad karma to get angry. But when you're mindful, it can make you very angry in the beginning. But what it's doing is it's allowing you to see how you get angry at things. When you're mindful, you're observing and sticking with the things that upset you, the things that cause desire, the things that cause aversion. And so it's necessary because you're going to watch those things. You have to learn about them. But in the beginning, this involves suffering. So I wouldn't worry about it, but it's important to understand what you're asking. It's not quite correct that what you're doing is causing suffering. It's just putting you in a position where suffering will arise. Like suppose we talk about some similar example in life. If you're waiting in line doesn't cause you suffering, but the fact that you don't want to wait in line causes you suffering. I mean, being patient in general causes suffering when you have impatience, when you're not a patient person. Doing menial labor, it's physically stressful, but otherwise it's not a problem, except that your mind doesn't like it. So it's the disliking of it, the boredom that causes suffering, not the actual experience. So meditation doesn't cause suffering, but the things that come up when you meditate, they cause you suffering, and that's necessary. I mean, that's really what it's all about. We want to see that. You want to see what's actually causing you suffering, not the meditation, but those things that it forces you to see. For example, bad past memories, trauma, that kind of thing, cause a lot of suffering, but it's not. You can't fault the practice. Why do we believe in a self? Why is it so hard to see non-self? Yeah, I mean, it's evolved. It's evolved from the idea of entities. It's evolved from possessiveness, desire, and so on. It comes and it goes. It seems like our sense of self changes. It waxes and it wanes. So it's a process. It's something that we go through. But where it comes from many different sources. 3, I guess. It comes from conceit. 2, I guess. It comes from conceit sometimes. It comes from desire, which is possessiveness. It comes from views, just the view that there is a self. But that is really the belief, right? Why is it so hard to see self, see non-self? Because of the way we look at the world. We look at the world that way. We're accustomed to looking at the world from a point of view of entities, which is really just it's a simpler, it's an easier way. It's less strenuous it's a simplification rather than having to be aware of things as being experiences. You can group those experiences into things. This is this, this is this. Practically, it takes a lot less energy, and it allows us to have more complex lives, which is what we've evolved to have, where we have many very complicated existence with many different entities involved. During sitting, I'm not experiencing any rising or falling movement most of the time, even when I place my hand on my stomach. So I note that as feeling. I only feel a slight pressure, so I note that as feeling. When I come back to the stomach, ultimate reality is feeling, and I alternate between feeling, and sitting. I notice my mind likes to control this by trying to feel the rise-fall movement even when it's not there. I only feel rising, falling when I sit with my back straight. Should I keep trying to feel the rising, falling? You should note what it is, again, that's preventing you from breathing naturally. There's often stress and tension. You try doing lying on your back. It'll help you see the rising and falling more clearly. Or again, you say with your back straight. That it shouldn't be necessary, but in the beginning that might be helpful. Again, we don't have to be aware of you don't have to be aware of a gross movement. It can be subtle, but just be aware of a slight expansion and contraction. But again, it's just an example object. You can adapt if necessary. I just don't think it's usually necessary. I think mostly it's our tension, stress, or mental state that prevents us from seeing clearly this a simple movement like the rising and the falling. What is the Heart Sutra? Well, I don't teach it, so I'm not going to really comment. What is the most important thing to notice? Is it intention or action? E.g., bend, then bending. When I try to notice both, I have to slow down daily activities. Sometimes even the initial intention is obvious, then the action is further consistent. I don't really understand this. You mean intending to bend and then bending, or you can note intending or wanting. We would say wanting to stand, standing. That's useful. But probably more important is the actual movement, the actual action. But either one is great. Note whatever arises, physically or mentally. Why do some monks take a vow of silence? I don't know. In Buddhism, there is no soul, so how can rebirth possible? I've given talks on this. Again, actually, I think last session I actually answered this. So we don't believe in rebirth, but death, when we talk about death, it's just a concept. Reality is experience, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, thinking, and that's always arising and ceasing. So when you pass away, that doesn't change. How is sensual pleasure and material desire different? I don't know. Are they different? I don't think they're different. Should we eliminate or minimize our expectations from the world? Sure, yes. Expectations are problematic. They're based on mostly desire, sometimes aversion, sometimes worry, sometimes fear, that kind of thing. So I think that, yes, that's a wise way of looking at things. Vantaso, hatavakaso vantaso. Vantaso means hopeless. One should be hopeless, meaning one should not hope for anything. Okay, that's all the questions. Thank you all for coming out. Have a good night.